Nations in 10. I have watched this little planet for 65,000 years. Let's do another country. Australia is the only place on Earth that is, at the same time, a country, a continent, and a crime scene. Let me explain. Because this entire nation started as Britain's answer to a very awkward question. Where do we put all these prisoners? But long before any of that, Australia already had people, for at least 65,000 years. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples built the oldest continuous living culture on the planet, older than the pyramids, older than basically everything. And they were inventive, too. They came up with the boomerang, a hunting tool that, if you miss, comes back so you can feel embarrassed twice. They managed the land, mapped the stars, and told stories that have survived tens of thousands of years. And then the boats showed up. First, the Dutch. In 1606, a sailor named Willem Janszoon bumped into the north coast, took one look around, and basically said, "No thanks." More Dutch ships followed, named it New Holland, decided it was too hot, too dry, and too full of things that bite, and left. Then, in 1770, British explorer James Cook sailed up the east coast, planted a flag, and claimed the whole thing for Britain, as if nobody already lived there. He called it New South Wales, a bold name for a place that looks nothing like Wales. Now, Britain had a problem. For years, they had been shipping their convicts off to America. But in 1776, America said a very firm no. Suddenly, the British prisons were overflowing, and they needed somewhere extremely far away to hide the evidence. Enter Australia. In 1787, 11 ships set sail, carrying about 1,500 people. Roughly half of them were convicts. This was the first fleet. Their crimes? Some were serious, many were not. People were shipped to the far side of the world for stealing bread, clothes, or a bit of cheese. After 8 brutal months at sea, they arrived in January 1788, led by Captain Arthur Phillip. They landed at Botany Bay, took one look at the swampy ground, and immediately moved up the coast to a spot we now call Sydney. The newcomers also met the local wildlife and had no idea what they were looking at. A giant hopping rat with a pouch that boxes? Sure, why not? For the people who had lived here for tens of thousands of years, this was a catastrophe. Disease, violence, and the loss of their land devastated Aboriginal communities. It is a painful history that Australia is still reckoning with today, and it is worth holding in mind as the rest of this story unfolds. Back in the new colony, life was rough. The crops failed, supplies ran low, and these former city pickpockets had no idea how to farm. But slowly, the colony survived. More ships came, free settlers arrived, and the convict camp started turning into actual towns. The colony grew, and so did its outlaws. The most famous, Ned Kelly, robbed banks wearing homemade armor, including a metal bucket on his head. And then, in 1851, someone found gold. A lot of gold. The gold rush was on, and people from all over the world raced to Australia to get rich. The population exploded. In a single decade, the population nearly tripled. Towns became cities almost overnight. Prospectors poured in from Britain, China, and America, all chasing the same shiny rocks, and mostly finding mud. But the miners were furious about expensive licenses and being pushed around by the colonial police. So in 1854, they built a wooden barricade, raised a flag, and rebelled. It was called the Eureka Stockade. The rebellion was crushed in about 15 minutes, but it embarrassed the government so badly that it helped push Australia toward democracy. By the late 1800s, Australia was 6 separate British colonies, each doing its own thing with different rules and even different train tracks. The train track thing was a genuine problem. The rails were different widths, so trains literally could not cross from one colony to the next. So they decided to team up. On the first day of 1901, the 6 colonies united into one country, the Commonwealth of Australia. Federation, a brand new nation with its own parliament and its own prime minister. But the new country's very first major law was the White Australia Policy, rules designed to keep non-European people out. It is one of the darker chapters of the story, and it lasted for decades. Then came the question every new country apparently has to fight about. Where do we put the capital city? Sydney and Melbourne both wanted it. They argued so much that the solution was to build a brand new city in an empty paddock exactly in between. That is Canberra. Yes, Australia's capital is a city they built out of spite in the middle of nowhere just to stop 2 cities from fighting. And the best part? They couldn't even design it themselves. The plan for Canberra was drawn by an American who won a contest. They outsourced their own capital. Then the 20th century arrived, and with it, the World Wars. In 1915, Australian and New Zealand soldiers, the ANZACs, landed at Gallipoli. The campaign was a disaster, and thousands of them died. It was a brutal defeat, but the courage of those soldiers became a defining part of how Australia sees itself, and Anzac Day still honors them every year. Now, we need to talk about the year 1932, because Australia did something no other country has ever quite matched. Australia went to war with birds. After the war, thousands of emus, giant, flightless, and weirdly fast birds, started trampling farmers' crops in Western Australia. The farmers begged the government for help, and the government, in its infinite wisdom, sent in the army with machine guns. This was a real military operation against emus. It is officially remembered as the Emu War. And here is the incredible part. The emus won. The birds scattered, split into little groups, and dodged the bullets. The guns jammed. After burning through thousands of rounds, the army basically gave up and went home. Final score, emus 1, Australian military 0. This really happened. You can look it up. And get this, a month later, they tried again, sent the soldiers back out, and the emus, once more, simply won. Twice. Anyway, after losing a war to poultry, Australia got back to nation building. World War II changed everything. When the fighting reached the Pacific and even bombed northern Australia, the country realized it could not rely on Britain forever. So Australia turned toward a new best friend across the ocean, the United States, a partnership that still shapes the country today. After the war, Australia threw open its doors to migrants. Millions of people from Europe and later from all over the world came to start new lives. Australians are also fanatical about sport. They invented their own football with barely any rules, where grown men in tiny shorts tackle each other over an egg-shaped ball. Slowly, the old white Australia policy was dismantled, and by the 1970s, it was gone for good. Australia was becoming one of the most multicultural countries on Earth, a place built by people from everywhere. They leaned so hard into being international that they somehow ended up in Eurovision, a European song contest. Australia is not in Europe. Nobody questions it, but the country still had unfinished business with its first peoples. In 1967, more than 90% of Australians voted yes in a referendum to properly count Aboriginal people and let the federal government make laws for them. In 1992, a landmark court case known as Mabo finally recognized that Aboriginal people had owned this land long before 1788. And in 2008, the Prime Minister stood up in Parliament and formally said sorry to the generations of Aboriginal children who had been taken from their families. It was an important step. The reckoning is not finished, but the country keeps trying to face it honestly. Okay, deep breath. Let's talk about the other thing Australia is famous for. Everything there wants to kill you. Australia is home to some of the most venomous snakes, spiders, and jellyfish on the entire planet. Then there's the platypus, a duck, a beaver, and a snake in a trench coat. It lays eggs, it has a bill, and yes, it's venomous. There are spiders the size of your hand. There is a jellyfish whose sting can ruin your whole week and possibly your whole life. There are crocodiles that haven't bothered evolving in millions of years because they got it right the first time. There's also a bird called the cassowary that can genuinely disembowel you. Australians just call it the murder bird. That's its name now. And yet somehow, Australians just live there, calmly, while the rest of us would not last a single afternoon. They are so relaxed about it that they invented a fake animal just to terrify tourists, the drop bear. Supposedly a vicious koala that drops out of trees onto your head. It is completely made up. Australians tell tourists it's real and then watch them panic. This is their idea of fun. Despite all of it, the deadly wildlife, the brutal sun, the haunted beginnings, Australia became one of the most livable countries in the world. Today, it is a wealthy, modern, multicultural democracy. Great cities, great beaches, and an economy that rode wave after wave of mining booms. To cope, Australians eat a black spread called Vegemite that tastes like the concentrated essence of betrayal. On toast. On purpose. It went from a dumping ground for prisoners to a place people all over the world dream about moving to. A country founded by people Britain didn't want, on land taken from people who were already here, in a place doing its best to kill everyone. And it turned out pretty well. And today, Australia has more kangaroos than people, roughly double. If they ever organize, it's over for us. So that's Australia, a prison colony that survived starvation, lost a war to birds, built a capital out of spite, and is still apologizing for its past while pretending koalas are assassins. Honestly, respect. And that is another nation explained in 10 minutes. Your country is next. Subscribe, and I'll butcher your history too.